Lines.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Whether it's the unemployed under 30 or students, the Abbott government wants them to carry a very big burden. Labor's position on higher education is clear. Bill Shorten has said, only through education will Australia fully develop our economic potential, our scientific potential, our artistic potential, our people's potential. Labor will vote against these cuts to university funding and student support. Labor will not support a system of higher fees, a new big tax, bigger student debt, reduced access and greater inequality. Labor will never tell Australians that the quality of their education depends on their capacity to pay. And this whole mess that we're in today, this Minister Pyne-inspired mess, the denials, the secret deals about what is happening to Australian universities under the Abbott government, starts with the Abbott government's broken promise of no cuts to education. The basis for this mess is the budget cuts which the government wants to impose on universities and university students. The minister has acknowledged, as Senator Carr pointed out this morning, that he's been working with the crossbenchers to implement a plan by Professor Bruce Chapman, a plan described by Professor Bruce Chapman as a tax, a plan described by Mr Andrew Norton, the government's advisor, as a tax. But of course, in the usual chaotic style of the Abbott government of backflips and not quite telling the truth, the minister says one thing and another minister says another thing. The government has also called it a fine. But to me and any sensible person out there, the designers of this secret new scheme, it is quite clearly a tax. So a tax is how I will describe it. And now this latest thought bubble, its ill-conceived tax for high fees, will hit students and for unknown numbers of universities will reduce their income as they pay this big fat new tax, this broken promise tax, directly to the government coffers. This latest tax thought bubble clearly confirms the Abbott government has no idea what it's doing in higher education, and all of this coming after the 2015 academic year has commenced. I went to University of Western Australia's O-Day and I asked students if they were worried about their futures under the Abbott government and what the Abbott government was doing. All of the students I spoke to told me they were very worried about their futures under the Abbott government, and they were very worried about the costs that they were going to incur, the high costs to be imposed on them by the Abbott government. I want to focus on the big fat new tax thought bubble of the Abbott government. Andrew Norton gives examples of the tax in his submission, and he used Chapman's submission for his examples. So if we look at humanities, fees above $6,500 but below $11,499 would incur a 20% tax. Fees above $11,500 but below $16,499 would include a whopping 60% tax. And fees of $16,500, a massive rate of an 80% tax. The undergraduate tax is a backdoor way to impose further cuts far above the 20% reduction in university funding already proposed. The University of Western Australia met with me over their proposed fee of $16,000 per year for an undergraduate degree, and they were at pains to point out that they'd done their research, they'd scrutinised their budgets, their revenues and their outgoings, and a fee of $16,000 per year was what they needed to ensure their running costs were met. Now, this new tax, this big fat new tax, another broken promise, no new taxes, would hit UWA's proposed fee, their carefully budgeted fee, their fee which covers their outgoings and provides revenue. This fee would be hit with the Abbott government's big fat new tax. Using the sliding scale of tax, surely adding the red tape that the government is so adverse to, applying the government's secret new tax would incur a tax of $3,700 per year on UWA's carefully thought-through undergraduate degree cost of $16,000 per year. Now, is UWA going to take a $3,700 hit to its course fee? No, of course it isn't. So this new tax will be passed on directly to students because UWA will be recouping the $3,700 slug in tax that they'll have to pay directly to the government from its $16,000 fee from students. This is what will happen. This is double taxation. Students will pay for their degree through HECS and again through undergraduate tax. And I'd love to hear the Abbott government's justification for saying to UWA, well, you might have carefully researched the $16,000 fee, but now we're going to tax it. And to add insult to injury, this secret new tax has not been thought through. More egg on Minister Pyne's face, as UWA will be paying more in tax to the government than what it receives in government subsidy, as the subsidy would be reduced to about $1,800 per year. I mean, what thought bubble? How did they arrive at that? The reality is this hastily concocted tax, and concocted's a favourite word today, Senator Rhiannon also described it as that, means for high fees in low subsidy disciplines, the Abbott government big fat new tax means UWA will pay more in tax than it receives in student subsidies. And there'll be more red tape for universities as they try and figure out taxes versus subsidy and, of course, more costs for students. There would be no incentive for universities to limit fee rises under this proposal. In fact, the tax would fuel faster increases than would otherwise have been the case. The big fat new tax, the secret deal to try and get the crossbenchers on board, would also be extremely complex to implement, with universities required to provide the details of more than 10,000 courses to the government. And you hear the government in here saying they don't want to interfere. Well, that's the first thing that would have to happen, and on top of that, monitoring by the ACCC. This approach was rejected in 2010 by the UK coalition government. It just shows you how out of ideas the Abbott government is in its chaotic approach to higher ed. This thought bubble by the Abbott government demonstrates once again they have no idea how universities work. They don't care about whether low-income families' kids get to university, and as usual, they are just looking after their rich mates, as this new tax will certainly ensure that only the children of the wealthy will be able to attend university. This is the same as their GP tax. It will be abandoned. It's just a matter of time. Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy.